Grok 4.5's output costs $6 per $1 million tokens. Claude Opus 4.8's costs $25, which is 4 times more expensive, and it still wins on performance. Both models dropped recently, and the pricing gap is wide enough to change how you build your whole stack. So I went through every spec, benchmark, and community test I could find, comparing Grok 4.5 versus Claude Opus 4.8 across 5 real tests with verified sources and 0 vendor spin. And honestly, the cheaper model isn't the clear winner here, because there's one dimension where Claude Opus 4.8 pulls so far ahead that the cost gap might not matter at all, and it's probably not the one most people are talking about. So this comparison is for developers and builders trying to pick the right model for production, because pick wrong and you're either overpaying by 4x on output tokens or leaving real coding accuracy on the table. And those differences compound fast at scale. Alright, so test 1 is real-time speed and latency, and when a model is slow you feel it. Your agent stalls mid-task, your user bounces, your whole agentic loop grinds waiting on a response. And Grok 4.5 has an independent measurement of 53 tokens per second, while Claude Opus 4.8 has no published number at all. I looked at every source I could find, and what surprised me is that Grok 4.5's independent throughput came in at 53 tokens per second, which is actually way below xAI's own vendor claims of 80 to 90, with first token latency at 13.8 seconds and end-to-end for 500 tokens at 19.4 seconds. And Claude Opus 4.8? No published figure anywhere. Take this with a grain of salt, because those Grok 4.5 latency numbers come from community blogs, not official benchmarks. And since Claude Opus 4.8 has 0 published speed data, you can't actually compare them head-to-head, so the honest read is we only have one side of the data, and that's just not enough to call it. I was expecting at least one published speed number from Anthropic and got nothing, so speed and latency is a tie. The data just isn't there to call it either way, which puts us at 0 for Grok 4.5, 0 for Claude Opus 4.8, with one tied. Now, test 2 is context window capacity, and the failure mode you actually run into is feeding a model a 600-page legal doc or a massive codebase and watching it cut off, lose the beginning of the file, miss the function you defined 50,000 tokens ago, and that truncation costs you real debugging time. What I found here is pretty clear. Grok 4.5 tops out at 500,000 tokens. Claude Opus 4.8 goes all the way to 1,000 thousands, and that's double the context, which is a real structural difference. So both are massive by any normal standard. But if you're working with truly large documents, Claude Opus 4.8 just fits more. I honestly expected both models to be close enough here that it wouldn't matter much, but 500K versus 1 million is a hard, verified difference. So Claude Opus 4.8 takes context window capacity purely on capacity, and that puts the running score at Grok 4.50, Claude Opus 4.81 with one tied. Okay, test 3 is coding accuracy and debugging, and the failure mode here is brutal. The model confidently writes code that doesn't run, or it half fixes a bug and introduces 2 new ones, and every bad output costs you review time, which in an agentic loop just compounds the problem downstream. On SWE Bench Pro, Grok 4.5 came in at 64.7%, which is the vendor's own claim, and Claude Opus 4.8 hit 69.2%. Though I want to be honest, that Claude number comes from a community report on Less Wrong, not from Anthropic directly, and it's the only head-to-head figure available, so I'm using it. But bear that in mind. I was expecting Grok 4.5 to be more competitive given all the coding benchmarks xAI published, but Claude Opus 4.8 edges it out at 69.2% versus 64.7% on SWE Bench Pro. So Claude Opus 4.8 takes coding accuracy, and that moves the score to Grok 4.50, Claude Opus 4.82 with one tied. So, test 4 is API pricing and cost efficiency, and the failure mode here is bill shock. You run a high-volume agentic workflow, generate a lot of output tokens, and suddenly your monthly API spend is 4 times what you budgeted, which is a business model problem, full stop. This is where I was genuinely surprised by how big the gap is. Grok 4.5 costs $2 per $1 million input tokens and $6 per $1 million output tokens. Claude Opus 4.8 is $5 input and $25 output, and that's 2.5 times more expensive on input and 4.2 times more expensive on output, with cached input the same at $0.50 but output dominating real usage. I knew Grok 4.5 would be cheaper, but wasn't expecting 4 times cheaper on output, which is a massive difference for anyone running at scale. So Grok 4.5 takes API pricing, no contest. And now we're at Grok 4.51, Claude Opus 4.82, with 1 tied heading into the last test. Alright, test 5 is hallucination and factual accuracy. And this one really matters if you're using a model for anything research-based or customer-facing. Because a model that confidently makes stuff up is worse than a slower model, and you end up shipping wrong answers your users catch before you do. Here's what I found, and it's kind of alarming. Grok 4.5 has an independently measured hallucination rate of 54% according to artificial analysis, which is a press measurement, not a vendor claim, and Claude Opus 4.8. Anthropic makes qualitative claims about improved honesty, but there's no published number to compare against. Before you read too much into that 54% figure, the honest thing to say is we don't have a comparable number for Claude Opus 4.8, so you can't call this a win for either side, and hallucination rates vary a ton by task type, so even if we had both numbers, the real-world gap might look very different. I was expecting at least one solid number from Anthropic here, and got a qualitative claim instead, so hallucination is another tie, the data's just too incomplete to call it, and the final running score is Grok 4.51, Claude Opus 4.82, with 2 tied. Okay, so where does Grok 4.5 clearly win? Pricing, full stop. $2 input and $6 output versus Claude Opus 4.8's $5.25, which is 4.2 times cheaper on output. And if you want a consumer subscription, Super Grok is $30 a month, while Claude Opus 4.8 is API only. And where does Claude Opus 4.8 clearly win? 2 things. The context window at 1 million tokens versus Grok 4.5's 500,000, which is double the capacity for large documents and massive codebases, and coding accuracy at 69.2% on SWE Bench Pro versus 64.7%, a real gap on the only head-to-head coding metric we have. Honestly, I went in thinking cost would be the tiebreaker, but Claude Opus 4.8 won on capability too, which makes this more interesting. So here's the decision rule. If you're running high-volume tasks and cost is what kills you, go Grok 4.5, because $6 output versus 25 is math that's hard to ignore. But if you need a 1 million token context window or the better coding benchmark, Claude Opus 4.8 is the pick.